"Run with your son," her mother-in-law whispered with her final breath, gripping Celine's hand in desperate warning. Celine thought it was the confusion of a dying woman, until she uncovered the terrifying secrets her husband had been hiding in plain sight. By the time she realized the truth, escaping him would become a fight for her life. Welcome to True Love Stories. If you love our stories, please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video. Now let's go into the story. The hospital room was too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind that pressed against Celine's chest and made each breath feel heavier than the last. The steady beep of the heart monitor cut through the silence, mechanical and indifferent. Pale winter light slipped through the blinds, striping the walls in dull gray shadows. Margaret lay small beneath the white sheets, her once commanding presence reduced to fragile breaths and trembling fingers. Illness had hollowed her cheeks and thinned her voice, but her eyes were alert that morning. Alert and afraid. Celine adjusted the blanket gently and leaned closer. "I'm here," she whispered. She had started calling her mom during the final weeks. It felt kinder. Margaret's gaze shifted toward her slowly, as if the movement cost her something. For a moment, Celine thought she wanted water. Instead, Margaret's hand suddenly shot out and grabbed her wrist with startling strength. The grip was desperate, almost painful. Celine gasped softly. "Margaret? What is it?" Margaret's lips trembled. Her eyes darted toward the door. Steve had stepped out minutes earlier to take a phone call. Only when the hallway fell quiet did Margaret lean closer, pulling Celine down with surprising force. Her breath was thin and strained against Celine's ear. "Run with your son." The words were barely sound, more breath than voice. Celine's heart skipped. "What?" she whispered urgently. Margaret's fingers tightened. "Run away from him." A chill shot through Celine's body. "From who?" "Steve." Margaret's eyes widened, not confusion, not delirium. Recognition. Fear. "Before he knows," she tried to finish, but the sentence dissolved into a shallow gasp. The heart monitor stuttered. Nurses rushed in. Celine was gently pulled back as doctors moved quickly around the bed. The room filled with sharp commands and urgent motion. Within minutes, the steady beep flattened into a single, unbroken tone. Margaret was gone. The funeral passed like a distant echo. Celine stood beside Steve as neighbors and colleagues offered condolences. Steve looked composed, dignified, the very image of a grieving son. He thanked everyone politely. He accepted their praise about Margaret and how proud she must have been of him. "She raised a fine man," someone said. Celine forced a nod. Steve's arm rested firmly around her shoulders, solid and reassuring. To everyone watching, they were a united family bound by loss. But the whisper replayed in her mind. Run away from him. It didn't make sense. Steve was attentive, respected in the community, a devoted father to their 3-year-old son, Leo. He provided for them comfortably. He had never been violent, never cruel, at least not in ways that left bruises. Yet as the day wore on, small memories began surfacing, details she had once dismissed. The way Margaret would fall silent when Steve entered a room. The subtle tightening of her jaw. The time she started to say something in the kitchen, then abruptly changed the subject when his footsteps approached. Celine had always assumed it was tension between mother and son. Nothing more. That night, the house felt emptier than usual. Leo slept soundly in his room, unaware that anything permanent had shifted. Steve stood by the bedroom window, staring into the dark yard. "You were very close to her," he said quietly without turning around. "She said something strange this morning," Celine replied carefully. Steve's shoulders stiffened, almost imperceptibly. "Oh," his tone was light. "I think the medication confused her," Celine added quickly, watching him. Steve turned then, his expression calm, eyes searching her face. "The doctors mentioned she'd been hallucinating near the end," he said smoothly. Celine didn't remember hearing that. Not once. But she nodded anyway. That must be it. He stepped closer and kissed her forehead. "Get some rest. It's been a long week." Later, lying beside him in the dark, Celine stared at the ceiling. Steve's breathing was slow and even, the rhythm of someone without worry. She turned her head slightly and studied his face in the faint glow of streetlight creeping through the curtains. He looked peaceful, familiar, safe. And yet Margaret's eyes that morning had not been confused. They had been terrified. Terrified people do not invent warnings. They do not grip your wrist with their last strength to whisper nonsense. They wait until the room is empty. They wait until their son steps out. And then they tell you to run. As sleep refused to come, one final detail settled into her thoughts like ice. Margaret had looked at the door before speaking. She had made sure Steve wasn't there. A slow, unfamiliar feeling crept into Celine's chest as she lay inches from her husband. For the first time since she married him, she was not certain she knew the man sleeping beside her. And for the first time, she wondered whether the danger Margaret feared had been in the room all along. The days after Margaret's funeral settled into a strange rhythm. On the surface, life resumed its normal shape. Steve returned to work. Leo went back to daycare. Celine cleaned, cooked, smiled when neighbors stopped by with leftover sympathy. But beneath the routine, something had shifted. The house no longer felt like home. It felt staged, as if she were walking through carefully arranged furniture on a set designed to look convincing. At first, the changes were small enough to doubt. Steve began locking his home office door. He had always valued privacy when working, but now the lock clicked even when he stepped out briefly. Once, Celine reached for the handle to leave a folded shirt on his desk and found it sealed shut. When she mentioned it casually at dinner, he didn't look up from his plate. "Confidential client files," he said. "You know how it is." His tone wasn't angry. It was flat, final. Then there were the phone calls. Steve started taking them outside, even in the cold evening air. He would step onto the porch, lowering his voice the moment he crossed the threshold. Through the kitchen window, Celine watched his silhouette pacing slowly back and forth. One night, she cracked the window just enough to catch fragments. "Handled already, no loose ends, she doesn't." The rest dissolved into the wind. When he came back inside, his expression was relaxed, almost pleasant. "Just work," he said before she could ask. She began noticing how easily he lied. Or perhaps how easily she had believed him before. His temper surfaced in flashes now. Not explosive, not the kind that shattered plates or left visible marks, but sharp and sudden. When Leo spilled juice on the rug, Steve's jaw tightened in a way that made Celine instinctively step between them. "He's 3, she said lightly, kneeling to clean the mess. Steve exhaled slowly, forcing a smile. "Of course. Just teaching him to be careful." But his eyes were cold for a second too long. Celine started remembering things she had once dismissed as stress. The way Steve disliked unannounced visitors. The way he insisted on handling all the finances himself. The way he would sometimes watch her quietly, as if measuring something unseen. At night, she would wake and find him sitting upright in bed, staring at nothing. When she asked if he was all right, he would lie back down immediately. "Bad dream," he'd murmur. One afternoon, while putting away laundry, Celine noticed something odd near the front door. Steve's shoes were caked with thick reddish soil, dried and cracking along the soles. It wasn't soil from their neighborhood. The earth around their home was dark and loamy. This was clay-like, almost rust-colored. She touched it lightly, then wiped her fingers clean before he came home. At dinner, she asked casually, "Have you been outside the city for work recently?" Steve paused mid-bite. "Why?" "Your shoes had dirt on them. Different dirt." She meant it as an observation, but the silence that followed stretched thin. Steve set his fork down slowly. "You're paying attention to my shoes now?" The question wasn't loud. It was precise. Celine forced a small laugh. "I was cleaning, that's all." He held her gaze a moment longer than necessary before resuming his meal. "You imagine things when you're grieving," he said calmly. "It's normal." That word lingered. Imagine. Margaret's whisper hadn't felt imagined. Over the next week, Celine became more observant. Steve started coming home later than usual, offering explanations that were almost too detailed, as if rehearsed. Traffic. Delayed meetings. A colleague going through a divorce who needed advice. The stories changed, but the tone remained consistent, smooth, unbothered, controlled. Yet there were gaps. One evening he claimed he'd been across town, but his car's mileage didn't match the distance. Another time, she found a receipt in his jacket pocket from a gas station nearly an hour away. When she handed it to him, he didn't flinch. "Must have stopped on the way back from a site visit," he said. "You really should stop digging through my pockets." The smile he gave her didn't reach his eyes. Digging. The word echoed louder than it should have. Celine began recalling Margaret's behavior over the years. How she sometimes looked at Steve not with pride, but with something closer to worry. How she would subtly defend him before anyone accused him of anything. "He works too hard. He carries a lot of pressure." At the time, Celine had thought it was a mother's instinct to protect her son's image. Now she wondered if Margaret had been protecting something else entirely. One night, as Celine passed Steve's office, she heard him speaking in a low, urgent tone. The door was closed, but not fully latched. She paused. "I told you it's handled," he whispered sharply. "No one talks. Not now. Not ever." There was a pause, then softer, colder words. "I'll take care of it myself if I have to." Celine stepped back quickly, her heart pounding. A moment later, the door opened. Steve stood there, phone in hand. His expression shifted instantly when he saw her. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Just getting water." He studied her face carefully, as if searching for cracks. For the first time, Celine felt certain of something she had been trying to avoid. Steve was hiding more than stress. More than business complications. There was a weight in him now, something coiled and watchful. And worse, she sensed he was beginning to watch her too. The house felt smaller each day. Quieter. Charged with something unspoken. Celine moved carefully, choosing her words, softening her tone, pretending not to notice the locks, the calls, the lies. But inside, the whisper had grown louder. Run away from him. And now, for the first time, she was no longer wondering if Margaret had been confused. She was beginning to wonder how much time she had left before Steve realized she was no longer blind. Celine did not confront Steve. She did not accuse him, question him, or even allow her face to reveal the storm building inside her. Instead, she adjusted. She softened her voice. She smiled more often. She asked fewer questions. If Steve was watching her, and she was certain now that he was, she would give him nothing to find. But while she played the part of the trusting wife, she began preparing quietly. The opportunity came 3 nights later. Steve announced over dinner that he had to travel out of town for a last-minute business meeting. "Back tomorrow evening," he said smoothly, reaching for his coat. He kissed Leo's forehead and brushed his fingers along Celine's cheek. "Don't stay up worrying." His eyes lingered on her a second too long. She waited. She watched his car disappear down the street. Then she waited another full hour, just in case he doubled back. When the house remained still, she locked the doors and stood in the silence, her pulse loud in her ears. His office door was locked, as always. Celine had anticipated that. Weeks earlier, she had noticed where he kept the spare key, taped inside the hollow base of an old trophy on the bookshelf in the hallway. At the time, she had thought it strange. Now it felt deliberate. Her fingers trembled as she unlocked the office door. The room smelled faintly of leather and cologne. Everything was immaculate, desk polished, papers stacked neatly, laptop closed in the center like something sacred. For a moment, doubt flickered. What if she found nothing? What if grief and fear had twisted her imagination into something ugly? Then she opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was a second phone. Not his usual one. This one was smaller, older. A burner phone. Her throat tightened. She pressed the power button. It lit up immediately. No password. The messages were already open. At first, they made little sense, short phrases, coded language. Payment confirmed. Delivery complete. No witnesses. Her breathing grew shallow as she scrolled further. There were references to locations she didn't recognize, initials instead of names, and repeated mentions of cleanup. One message froze her completely. She doesn't suspect anything. The timestamp was from 3 weeks ago. Celine's hands began to shake so badly she had to sit down. She read it again, hoping she had misunderstood. She hadn't. Her mind raced. Was it about her? Someone else's wife? Someone else entirely? She forced herself to keep scrolling. There were bank transfer confirmations attached in images. Large sums wired to offshore accounts. Far more money than Steve's legitimate business could explain. And then, buried deeper in the message history, came something worse. A photo. It was grainy, taken at night. A stretch of isolated land. Red soil. The same red soil she had seen on his shoes. Another message followed beneath it. Taken care of. No one will find it. Celine felt the air leave her lungs. Her gaze darted to the door as if Steve might suddenly appear there. The house creaked faintly in the quiet, making her flinch. She put the burner phone back exactly as she found it and turned to the laptop on the desk. It required a password. She tried Leo's birthday. Access denied. She tried their anniversary. Denied. She hesitated, then typed Margaret's birthday. The screen unlocked. A cold wave of realization washed over her. His mother's birthday. Folders filled the desktop. Most were labeled with ordinary business names, but one folder sat blank. No title, just a small dot. She opened it. Inside were scanned documents, contracts under shell company names, property deeds, payment logs. And a spreadsheet. A detailed ledger of transactions far beyond anything legal. Some entries were highlighted in red. Next to one entry was a note. Resolved. Another, silenced. Her stomach twisted violently. She didn't know the full scope of what she was looking at, but she knew enough. This wasn't tax evasion. This wasn't minor fraud. This was organized. Intentional. Dangerous. And Margaret had known. Suddenly, so many memories rearranged themselves into something clearer. Margaret insisting Steve stay home certain nights. Margaret making excuses for unexplained absences. Margaret looking tired, not from age, but from carrying something heavy. She hadn't just been protecting her son's reputation. She had been helping him bury his secrets. And at the end, guilt had cracked her open. Celine quickly searched for anything that tied directly to violence. Police reports, names, threats. She found an email chain between Steve and an unnamed contact discussing pressure tactics. Another referenced someone who had been uncooperative. Attached was a local news clipping about a man who had gone missing 6 months earlier. The case remained unsolved. The red soil image resurfaced in her mind. Her heart pounded so loudly she was afraid the neighbors might hear it. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was proof. And proof was dangerous. Celine grabbed a small flash drive from Steve's drawer and used, still in packaging. Her fingers moved quickly now, adrenaline overriding fear. She copied the folder. The spreadsheet. The message screenshots she had quickly photographed with her own phone. Every second felt borrowed. Halfway through the transfer, her phone buzzed in her hand. Steve calling. Her blood turned to ice. She stared at the screen, unable to breathe. Had he installed tracking software? Could he see remote access to his files? Did he somehow know? The phone continued vibrating. She forced herself to answer, keeping her voice steady. Hi. Just checking in, Steve said lightly. Everything all right? Yes. Leo's asleep. A pause. Too long. You sound strange, he said softly. I'm tired. Another pause. Then he laughed quietly. Get some rest. I'll see you tomorrow. The call ended. Celine stared at the laptop screen. The file transfer had completed. She ejected the flash drive and slipped it into her pocket just as headlights swept briefly across the front window from a passing car. Her entire body jolted. She restored everything precisely as she found it. The folder closed, the laptop shut, the burner phone returned, the drawer locked. When she finally stepped out of the office, she felt like she had crossed an invisible line. There was no going back to ignorance. Steve was not just hiding business secrets. He was involved in something calculated and criminal, possibly deadly. And if he suspected she had seen even a fraction of it, She knew with chilling certainty that he would not hesitate to protect himself. Margaret's unfinished sentence echoed louder now. Before he knows. Celine understood at last. Before he knows that you know. She walked quietly to Leo's room and stood over his small bed, watching his chest rise and fall in peaceful rhythm. His innocence felt painfully fragile. If Steve discovered the truth about her discovery, she would not get a warning. There would be no whispered chance to run. And for the first time, Celine realized something even more terrifying than what she had found. She was living with a man capable of making people disappear. After that night in the office, Celine understood one thing with terrifying clarity. She could not panic. Panic would get her killed. Steve was observant, controlled, and patient. If she moved too quickly, if she packed a suitcase or confronted him, or even changed her tone too abruptly, he would see it. And once he saw it, he would act. So she became better. Better at smiling. Better at listening. Better at pretending. When Steve returned from his business trip, she greeted him at the door with a soft kiss and warm dinner waiting. She asked about the meeting. She laughed at the appropriate moments. She let him talk. All the while, the flash drive felt like it burned in the back of her mind, hidden inside an old jewelry box beneath scarves she never wore. Steve watched her closely that evening. Not obviously, not suspiciously, but carefully, as if measuring whether anything had shifted in her. "You've been quiet lately," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "Just tired," she replied gently. "Losing your mom, it's catching up to me." His expression softened at that. Or at least it appeared to. "Grief does strange things," he said calmly. "It makes people imagine threats where there are none." The words were deliberate. Celine felt them land like a test. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I know," she said, holding his gaze steadily. "I've been overthinking." A long pause passed between them. Then Steve smiled. Test passed. But she knew she didn't have much time. Over the next several days, Celine began preparing in ways that wouldn't draw attention. She withdrew small amounts of cash during routine grocery trips, $40 here, $60 there. Never enough to trigger suspicion. She placed the bills inside a children's coloring book in Leo's room. She visited the bank and asked casual questions about opening a separate savings account for Leo's future, claiming she wanted it to be a surprise for Steve. The banker smiled warmly and handed her brochures. Celine left with information and a growing awareness that she would need more than money. She would need proof in safe hands. One afternoon while Steve was at work, she drove to a neighboring town instead of her usual shopping center. There, she met briefly with an attorney whose name she found online. She framed the meeting as estate planning, asking what would happen if something were to happen to her. The lawyer's polite smile faded slightly as Celine asked careful, hypothetical questions about financial crimes and immunity for cooperating spouses. He studied her with sharper eyes then. "If you're in danger," he said quietly, "documentation is critical. And timing matters." Timing. Celine drove home, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened. At night, Steve's behavior grew subtly different. He started coming to bed later. Sometimes she would wake and find him standing near the doorway, watching her. When she stirred, he would step forward immediately and climb back under the covers. "Couldn't sleep," he'd murmur. Once, she made the mistake of locking the bathroom door while showering. When she came out, Steve was sitting on the edge of the bed. "Why did you lock it?" he asked mildly. "I didn't realize I did," she lied. His eyes lingered on her face, searching. "You don't need to lock doors in this house," he said softly. The statement sounded gentle. It wasn't. Celine adjusted her plan that night. She could not wait much longer. The longer she stayed, the higher the risk that Steve would sense the shift beneath her calm surface. And recently, he had started asking small, probing questions. "Did you go anywhere today? Who did you talk to? Why was your phone off for 20 minutes?" Each question was wrapped in casual tone, but there was steel underneath. Then came the moment that erased any remaining hesitation. She was folding laundry in their bedroom when Steve walked in unexpectedly. He held her phone in his hand. You left this in the kitchen, he said. Her heart slammed violently against her ribs. Had he gone through it? Had he seen the photos she'd taken of the burner phone messages? She forced herself to walk toward him calmly. Thanks. He didn't hand it over immediately. Instead, he tilted his head slightly. You wouldn't keep secrets from me, would you, Celine? The air felt thin. Of course not, she said gently. Why would I? He watched her for a long, silent moment. Then he smiled and gave the phone back. Just making sure we're still honest with each other. That night, Celine barely slept. He was suspicious. Maybe not certain, but suspicious. She realized something chilling. If Steve ever confirmed that she had accessed his files, she would not get a confrontation. There would be no argument. No screaming match. There would only be an accident. A disappearance. A story told smoothly to neighbors and police. And Margaret would not be there to warn her again. Celine decided the next window of opportunity would be her only one. 2 mornings later, Steve mentioned an early meeting across town. I'll shower and head straight out, he said, setting his briefcase near the door. Celine's pulse quickened. This was it. She moved carefully, heart pounding but face composed. While Steve showered upstairs, she retrieved the hidden cash, the flash drive, Leo's birth certificate, and a small backpack she had quietly prepared days earlier. She dressed Leo quickly, whispering that they were going on a surprise trip. From upstairs, the shower shut off. Time compressed. She slid her phone into her pocket, then hesitated. No, he could track it. She powered it off and left it on the kitchen counter. From the bathroom came the faint sound of a drawer opening. Celine lifted Leo into her arms and walked calmly, to the front door. Her hands trembled as she unlocked it. The morning air hit her face like ice. Behind her, a floorboard creaked upstairs. She did not run. Not yet. She walked to the car, buckled Leo in, and started the engine with shaking fingers. As she reversed out of the driveway, the front door of the house opened. Steve stepped outside. Their eyes met through the windshield. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't confused. He was watching. Celine forced herself not to accelerate too quickly. She raised one hand in a small wave, as if heading to daycare. Steve raised his hand back slowly. But he did not smile. And as Celine turned the corner, her entire body went cold with one undeniable realization. He knew something was wrong. Maybe not everything, but enough. And now the clock was ticking. Celine didn't breathe properly until she had driven 3 towns over. Even then, every car in her rearview mirror looked like Steve's. Every black sedan felt like a threat. Leo hummed softly in the back seat, unaware that his small backpack held the beginning of their escape. Celine kept her speed steady, refusing to draw attention. Panic would make her careless. Carelessness would make her visible. Steve had seen her leave. He hadn't tried to stop her. That frightened her more than if he had chased the car down the driveway. At the first gas station outside the county line, she pulled in and paid cash. She didn't go inside. Cameras. Records. She drove again, this time toward the neighboring city where no one knew her name. Only when they reached a crowded shopping complex did she allow herself to stop. She borrowed a stranger's phone near the entrance, claiming hers had died and she needed to call her sister. Instead, she dialed the attorney she had met days earlier. "It's happening," she said quietly when he answered. There was a pause on the line, then his tone shifted from polite to sharp. "Are you safe right now?" "For the moment. Do not go home. Go directly to the police. Bring everything. Everything." Celine ended the call and sat frozen for a moment. Reporting Steve meant crossing a line she could never uncross. It meant public exposure. Investigation. Headlines. It meant accepting fully that the man she married was capable of destroying lives, including hers. Her phone, left behind on the kitchen counter, would buy her some time. But not much. Steve was intelligent. Methodical. If he suspected she had discovered something, he would move quickly. As if summoned by her thoughts, the borrowed phone rang in her hand. Unknown number. Her stomach dropped. She answered slowly. "Celine." Steve's voice was calm. Too calm. You forgot your phone. She swallowed. I realized. I was taking Leo to see my sister. There was silence on the other end. Not empty silence, measured silence. You didn't mention that, he said lightly. It was last minute. Another pause. She could almost hear his mind working. Come home, he said finally. We can talk. Talk. The word felt like a trap closing. I just need some space, she replied carefully. His tone cooled by a single degree. Almost undetectable. Space from what? From you. From everything, she said instead. His next words came softer, lower. Did you go into my office, Celine? Her heart slammed violently against her ribs. She forced a small, confused laugh. What? No. You're not a good liar, he said gently. The gentleness terrified her. Come home, he repeated. Before this becomes something it doesn't need to be. The line went dead. Celine stared at the phone, her hands shaking. He knew. Maybe not what she had taken. Maybe not how much she had seen. But he knew she had crossed into territory he considered his. She handed the phone back to the stranger with a quiet thank you, then buckled Leo in and drove straight to the police department downtown. At first, the officers were cautious. Steve's name carried weight. Successful businessman. Community donor. Clean record. But Celine placed the flash drive on the desk with steady hands. Please, she said. Just look. They did. The shift in the room was gradual but undeniable. One officer leaned forward. Another called someone else in. The spreadsheet opened. The messages scrolled. The photo of the red soil appeared on screen. How did you get this? A detective asked. He's my husband, Celine replied, her voice cracking for the first time. And he's dangerous. Within an hour, the atmosphere had changed completely. Financial crimes were one thing. But cross-referencing the names in Steve's files with open investigations triggered alarms. One name matched an ongoing missing persons case. Another linked to a stalled federal inquiry. Steve wasn't just operating in shadows. He had been skating just outside the reach of suspicion for years. As officers began making calls, Celine sat in a small interview room holding Leo in her lap. Her mind raced with one paralyzing thought. What if they didn't move fast enough? Steve would not wait politely at home. And she was right. Across town, Steve stood in his office staring at the empty drawer where the flash drive packaging had once been. The burner phone lay open in his hand. The message thread had been accessed. He could see the read timestamps. He didn't shout. He didn't throw anything. He simply inhaled slowly. Then he began making calls. By evening, Celine's sister called in tears. Steve was here, she whispered. He said you were unstable, that you took Leo and ran. He was asking where you'd go. Celine closed her eyes. He was building a narrative. Of course he was. By nightfall, officers informed her that Steve had attempted to access several accounts and had contacted 2 known associates under investigation. One of those associates, already under pressure from authorities, panicked. And panic makes people talk. Just after midnight, a breakthrough came. A warrant was issued. Surveillance units were dispatched. Steve had packed a suitcase and withdrawn a large amount of cash. He was running. Celine sat in protective custody as hours crawled by. Every passing minute stretched painfully. Leo slept against her shoulder, his small hand gripping her shirt. Then, just before dawn, a detective entered the room. We got him. The words felt unreal. He was at the airport, the detective continued, trying to board a private charter. He didn't resist. Of course he didn't. Steve never lost control publicly. But as officers escorted him through the terminal, cameras captured something they hadn't expected. His composure slipping for a fraction of a second when he spotted the federal agents waiting. Reckless at the end. Just enough. By morning, the news was spreading. Financial crimes. Conspiracy. Obstruction. Investigations reopened. Associates detained. And beneath it all, the beginning of something far darker being uncovered. Celine sat in silence as the weight of it settled over her. Relief did not come all at once. It arrived cautiously, like light filtering through storm clouds. Steve had hunted her. But this time, he had miscalculated. He underestimated the one thing he had always controlled. The woman who had finally stopped pretending not to see. The morning after Steve's arrest did not feel triumphant. It felt unreal. Celine sat in a quiet room inside the protective housing unit, staring at a muted television screen as Steve's face appeared beneath bold headlines. Respected businessman arrested at airport. Financial crimes and federal investigation. The footage showed him in handcuffs, flanked by agents, his expression composed but pale. To anyone watching casually, he still looked controlled, dignified. But Celine saw what others wouldn't. The tightness in his jaw, the flicker in his eyes, the calculations still working behind them. Even now, he was thinking. Leo stirred beside her, rubbing his eyes. "Mama," he whispered sleepily. "I'm here," she said, pulling him close. And for the first time in weeks, her voice did not shake. The investigation moved quickly after the arrest. Once Steve was in custody, 2 of his associates accepted plea deals. The spreadsheet Celine had copied Open Doors authorities had been trying to unlock for years. Financial trails led to shell companies. Shell companies led to properties. One of those properties matched the red soil location in the photograph. Excavation began within days. Celine did not watch the coverage when they announced what had been found. She didn't need confirmation to understand the weight of it. Steve's crimes extended beyond money. The word homicide began appearing in reports. Conspiracy, coercion, obstruction of justice. The man she had slept beside for years had been living a double life beneath her roof. And Margaret had known. That realization haunted Celine more than the headlines. Margaret's final days replayed in her mind. The exhaustion in her eyes, the urgency in her grip. She hadn't just been afraid of her son. She had been afraid of what he would do once she was gone. For years, she must have believed she could contain him, manage him, cover for him. And when her strength faded, guilt forced her to choose between loyalty and innocence. In the end, she chose Celine and Leo. The court proceedings began within weeks. Celine testified behind a protective screen. Seeing Steve again for the first time since the driveway felt like stepping into ice water. He looked thinner, sharper somehow, but his composure remained intact. When their eyes met briefly, there was no apology in his gaze. No remorse. Only anger. Not explosive anger. Cold anger. As if she had broken an unspoken agreement. When asked on the stand how she discovered the evidence, Celine's voice trembled only once, when she spoke about Margaret's warning. The courtroom shifted at that. Jurors leaned forward. The image of a dying mother whispering for her grandson to run was not easily ignored. Steve's defense attempted to paint Celine as unstable, grief-stricken, paranoid. But the documents spoke louder than character attacks. The bank records, the messages, the excavation reports, the testimony of former associates. Control was the foundation of Steve's life. And it had finally fractured. The verdict came on a gray afternoon. Multiple counts. Guilty. Celine did not cry when the sentence was read. She felt something quieter than relief. Something steadier. Safety. Real safety. The kind that does not depend on someone else's mood. In the months that followed, Celine relocated under a protection program. A new city. A modest apartment with sunlight that filled every corner. Leo adjusted faster than she expected. Children are resilient when fear is removed from the air they breathe. At night, Celine sometimes woke abruptly, heart racing, certain she had heard a door creak or footsteps in the hall. Trauma does not dissolve just because danger is locked away. But gradually, those nights became less frequent. She started therapy. She found part-time work. She built routines that belonged only to her and her son. One evening, nearly a year later, she stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes while Leo colored at the table behind her. The window was open. A warm breeze drifted in. There were no locked office doors in this apartment. No hushed phone calls on the porch. No careful monitoring of her tone. Just quiet. Real quiet. "Mama," Leo said, holding up his drawing. Look. She turned. It was a picture of the two of them holding hands under a bright blue sky. No third figure. No shadows. She knelt beside him and smiled. It's beautiful. Later that night, after he fell asleep, Celine sat alone for a while and allowed herself to think about Margaret. About that hospital room. About the whisper that had changed everything. Run with your son. If Margaret had stayed silent, Celine might have doubted herself longer. She might have hesitated. And hesitation, she now understood, could have cost them their lives. Margaret's final act had not erased her complicity in Steve's secrets. But it had redeemed something. It had saved a child. Celine no longer felt defined by what she had escaped. She felt defined by what she had chosen to do when the truth stood in front of her. She had not ignored it. She had not minimized it. She had run. And in running, she had broken a cycle that might have consumed her son next. As she turned off the lights and walked down the hallway of her new home, the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt earned. For the first time in years, Celine closed her eyes without fear of the man sleeping beside her. Because he wasn't there. And he never would be again. Finally, we have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more intriguing stories.